Hello, Brother
So
Rainer and
let's
Brother
see.
Gregory. Hello,
Happens.
good evening, listeners. This is Blessed Radio. It's Tuesday night, just after 6 p.m. and it's the spiritual discussion program. Are you there? This is Brother Sard in London in the studio. Have I got Brother Gregory there?
Two in call. So
Hello, Brother Gregory and Brother Rainer. I can hear you.
Sard is not in the call yet.
I don't even know they're working. Hello, Brother Rainer. Oh, can you hear me?
Check.
Oh, okay, there we go. Hello, Brother Rainer and Brother Gregory. Can you hear me? Hello? They're there. Yeah. Okay. All right, dear listeners, this is Brother Sard. I'm going to introduce you to the show. The aim of the show is to introduce you to the Grail message in the light of truth by Abrushin. And it's a question and answer show. The topic for tonight is sympathy and empathy. So please do join us with any questions or comments that you might have. I'm going to give you the details a bit later. Just want to check if Brother Gregory, are you there now? Hello, Brother Gregory. Okay. Okay. So, dear listeners, I want to first of all tell you about the Grail message. Are you there, Brother Rainer?
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
Here.
Okay. We've been listening to you talking. You've been live on the radio. Yes. But I think you couldn't hear me.
You're very silent again.
Okay.
Go closer to the microphone.
Yeah, I'm right against the mic.
Oh, well, that's not good. You're very silent.
Very silent. Okay. Is it better now?
Oh, that's better now.
Yes, it's better.
Okay. Apologies for that.
So why is it suddenly so good?
Yeah, we just adjusted something there. So apologies for that. Dear listeners, we're going to start from now. So this is Brother Sard in the studio in London. And with me abroad is Brother Gregory and Brother Rainer. Brother Gregory, please tell us where you are and how's the weather where you are.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear, yes.
Yes, I'm in the capital of Europe in Brussels, and the beautiful weather, not too cold, and nice evening.
Okay, very good. And Brother Rainer, please tell us where you are and how is the weather where you are.
The weather's excellent, so I don't mind not being in the capital.
Okay.
But I'm in a little town, 350,000 people in Germany, and we've got blue skies all day long, and a lovely summer wind. So with me, everything is fine, and I feel very good to be here tonight.
Thank you for that. And here in London, it's been very warm, a little windy. And yes, it's just like a bit of the summer we had earlier. It's about, I think it was 24 degrees or 25 degrees, something like that. So really nice here. So dear listeners, as always, the aim of the show is to introduce you to the spiritual knowledge in the light of truth, the Grail message by Abrushin. And the topic for discussion tonight is sympathy and empathy. We'd love you to join us with any questions or comments. The number to contact us here in UK, it is 079 444 313 66. You can call, text or use WhatsApp. And if you're outside of UK, it is 0044 79 444 313 66. So I'd like to start with, what is the Grail message? The Grail message in the light of truth by Abrushin is a spiritual knowledge of life. It offers an explanation of the world, a picture of creation on the basis of natural laws. Its lectures contain valuable basic elements as a help in life. For through the knowledge mediated, the reader is again brought closer to life and led back to God. The Grail message deals with important fundamental questions of life by explaining in a clear and logical way the automatic working of the laws of nature, the whole weaving of creation, allowing every process to be recognized and thereby the purpose of our whole life. It is directed at the individual and speaks to the innate experiences of the human being, their strengths and weaknesses. Thus, every reader has the opportunity to discover through the intuitive perception if what is stated is the truth. Combining with matter-of-fact reasoning, a complete world picture arises, where there is no separation between the visible world and the great world beyond the five senses, nor any separation between scientific and religious striving for knowledge. I'd like to give you a couple of quotes from the author of the Grail message, Abdul Shin. The hearer and reader of my lectures should always work within himself, keenly probing and building bridges from one lecture to the other, as well as out into the great and small world happenings. Only then will he be able to understand the Grail message and find that it gradually shapes itself into one complete whole, without leaving any gaps. Again and again, in all the happenings, the reader will come back to the basic features. He can explain everything without having to change even one single sentence. The word of the Grail message lives, so that it permits only those people who really carry the honest desire in their souls to find abundantly. All else is automatically rejected by it. For the arrogant and those who seek superficially, the message will remain the book with 7 seals. And I'd like to give you one more quote from the author. I wish to fill the gaps which have so far always remained unanswered in the souls of men, and which never leave any serious thinker in peace if he earnestly seeks for the truth. So dear listeners, just to remind you again, the topic for tonight is sympathy and empathy. We'd love you to join us with any questions or comments. The number to contact us here in UK, it is 079 444 313 66. You can call, text or use WhatsApp, and if you're outside of UK, it is 0044 79 444 313 66. Brother Gregory, I'd like to start with you, please, with my first question. Please, can you tell us what is sympathy? That's to Brother Gregory.
Hello. The question, which I will repeat here, is what is sympathy? First, one has to look at the scenario where sympathy is offered and look at the so-called dictionary definition of sympathy, where it is said sympathy is a perception, an understanding or reaction to the distress or need of another life form. So when sympathy is mentioned, there must be more than one object or more than one person involved. So it's, like you say, it's a perception. But what type of perception? Basically, when sympathy is mentioned, from another point of view, there must be some form of maybe misfortune or sorrow, or where one has pity, or one tries to swing to have an understanding for that particular scenario, or for those who are involved in the other end. So to get the proper meaning of sympathy, one must look at these things. One must have an attitude, a point of view, which is based on the laws through which everything has come into existence. That means the laws of nature or the laws of creation. So in discussing it further, one must understand that there are vibrations. To be able to vibrate with the same understanding, that calls for something which is common or that which is homogeneous. So sympathy may be understood in relation with some form of homogeneity. That means one is able to put oneself into the shoes, or in quote, into the shoes of another. One is able to vibrate, to share that particular suffering by being on the similar wavelength, something which is close to the attraction of homogeneity. And only through that personal suffering is one able to awaken to the suffering of another, and is able automatically to send good thoughts, good wishes, and many other things attached to it, such that the persons, the other people concerned, may their suffering or their misfortune may be alleviated. So that is the perception that one would like to discuss with relation to sympathy.
Thank you for that, Brother Gregory. Brother Rainer, would you say that is like also compassion there, the meaning of sympathy, that you feel like, when somebody's suffering something, it's like you want to help them, isn't it? So is that also, I mean, in a way, I want to ask, is compassion the same as sympathy, or is that something a bit different? That's to Brother Rainer. Are you there? Brother Rainer, are you there? You must be on mute, I think.
Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay, all right.
I
Okay,
keep forgetting
so
that. I hope you have some sympathy for me.
Yes, I do.
For my predicament.
Yes, yes, thank you. That's a good example. Although I would say it's not as deep as what let's say people are suffering when we call sympathy. Yeah. But go ahead, yes, please.
Yes. There are lots of videos on sympathy and how it's being used on YouTube, and in fact I did just look at one of them, but I looked also at the dictionary examples like Brother Greg, and there were two meanings in the dictionary which they contrast a little bit, and I just give the example for one of the meanings. One example sentence was, they had great sympathy for the flood victims.
Mm-hmm.
And the other meaning was more, the special sympathy between the two boys was obvious to all. So I would look at it, they had great sympathy for the blood victims. That was synonyms they gave is commiseration, pity, condolence. That's often used in England. I wasn't aware of that meaning and how restricted in most cases it is used, or consolation when someone died. You use the word sympathy. In fact, when someone died, you can do nothing about it. And some definitions said, when you look at sympathy, how it's mostly used, it doesn't entail becoming active and helping the other one. So you just express your sympathies, but you do not help because you cannot help. Like they had great sympathy for the flood victims. There's not much you can do for the flood victims, except you are immediately there where they are and you can help, but you can be far away. So this meaning I didn't have in mind when I suggested that word for the title. I was more thinking of the other term, which is in the direction of an understanding between people. And that would be the example sentence in the dictionary. There was, the special sympathy between the two boys was obvious to all. So those two boys were attuned. There was an affinity and empathy, and a congeniality. I think I hope I pronounced that rightly. Congenial. That means the same as homogeneous. Co-genius, co means with, and genius is the same as in homogeneous, the genus, the type, the manner of the same type. And once you are of the same type, or you have a homogeneity between two people, the more the more homogeneous things you have, the closer you feel to the other person. And of course, it's on a spectrum. If you have, it's then wonderful if you are completely with a homogeneous, a person who is homogeneous on many levels, and you have a lot of affinity, a lot of common things, and then this bond or this mutual understanding is very deep, and it's a very wonderful relation you can have with another human being. And so that's what I was thinking about it when I was suggesting that title. Sympathy being attuned between you and another being, as Brother Greg said, it always concerns a relation between human beings, or a relation also with animals, but that is just, let me just restrict it to human beings. And although it can encompass, of course, everything. So there you are attuned, and then you have this emotion of being attuned, and you have this flow between two human beings, where you can talk easily and the talk flows. Whereas if the homogeneity is reduced between the persons, you find it more and more difficult to find a topic to talk about. And if the homogeneity is almost excluded or is not there, then the only thing you can do is engage in small talk or some very superficial things. But so I would say sympathy expresses a deep harmony and deep accord and compatibility between two human beings. And that's how I would like more to talk it, how I would like more to have it dealt with in the context of that current broadcast than just having the sympathy, expressing sympathies for something, but not being forced to act or not being prompted to act. That is more an expression of politeness. And of course, then comes the great question: what is the feeling? What is the difference then between sympathy and empathy? And I just pass it back to you, Sard,
Yes,
because you might
that
want to
is
ask the question someone
of course
different.
Thank you for that. That is the next obvious question. Yes, what's the difference between sympathy and empathy? So yes, let me put that to Brother Gregory then. Yeah, what's the difference, Brother Gregory, between sympathy and empathy?
Well, the first thing one should concern: what is the similarity between sympathy and empathy? And before one starts saying the differences, basically one may say that one is completely in the other. Whatever, if one is sympathetic to a cause, that means there is a basis for empathy. Most of the time when the cause or the perception has to do with misfortune or sorrow, that is where sympathy is shown. I mean, in most occasions, when there is happiness, you don't say, I'm sympathetic to this music. That doesn't happen. You don't use it in that particular scenario. Sympathy is basically used when there is some misfortune or some sorrow or something which, I mean, it's in commiseration to other parties. Whereas empathy is more generic, it's more general. One can say, I have empathy for a particular cause, which has nothing to do with sorrow. So the way one sees it is one is inside the other. One is more generic and can be used in all scenarios, whereas the case of sympathy is basically tied to where there is sorrow or misfortune. It is possible to refine it and refine it, but personally, I don't consider it to be of much difference unless one wants to go into the syntax and all the nuances at which scenarios these things are used.
Thank you for that, Brother Gregory. So what I want to move into now is like a spiritual understanding of this, how it works as well. So Brother Reiner, would you say that to have sympathy for someone, you would have to have the same experience as that person who's, and we said sympathy is for somebody who's suffering misfortune. So yeah, but
No.
let's try to compare sympathy and empathy at the same time in a way. So
Yes.
if somebody's suffering misfortune, and would you say that, you know, to appreciate that, you have to really have had to have that experience yourself?
Let us look at the sentence again, which I quoted as one of the meanings for sympathy, which was they had great sympathy for the flood victims.
Yes.
And of course it requires an understanding, but does understanding require you have gone through the same experiences? Obviously not, at least not in this life, because you have not been a victim of a flood. You're still alive, and you have not suffered the horrible consequences of being flooded or your house being destroyed. Still, you can have sympathy. You can put yourself into that place. I think that's the important thing. You can put yourself in other people's shoes, and that's the real meaning of empathy. And you suffer with them. Their suffering becomes almost your own suffering, or their joy also can also become your own joy. It's this ability to put yourself into the shoes of someone else and to be in tune with them. And I think that's the important thing. And no, you have not had the same experiences. A person that would be terrible. That means we could not understand anyone else. But love, which is the basic emotion behind everything, and how Jesus described it, sympathy and empathy, these are all parts of this wonderful emotion. To love someone else, then you care about him and you are completely in tune with him. You understand his deepest inner selves and his sorrows and his predicaments, and you want to help in a way that really helps to help him to get out of this predicament. That might be that you in fact cannot do anything because you have to let the other person go through those experiences, but definitely not, we need not to go through the same experiences than the person for whom we feel empathy or for whom we feel sympathy. So this is a definite no to the question. I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you.
Perhaps I'd like to read something about empathy.
Okay.
How it's about it's from Daniel Coleman. It's called Emotional Intelligence, and it's very good, that book, especially if you read it in the context with the Grail message. And it talks about the contrary. There are people which are emotionally blind, which cannot feel empathy. They cannot put themselves into the shoes of someone else. So the whole interpersonal relationship is really based 90%. The most important part is not based on words, but on an emotional rapport with the other persons. And that emotionally blind person, it's called, in the academic term, it's called the alexithymic person, is practically blind. He even doesn't understand his own feelings. He's completely dissociated from his own self. When his heart races, he cannot tell the reason for it. He often looks for a physical explanation. He thinks, oh, I've perhaps had they served me perhaps a very strong cup of coffee, but he cannot describe and find the reason. What is the emotion behind it? And it's about 10% of the population they regard as alexithymics, which means emotionally blind people. And the person who shows empathy is just the contrary. He's very in tune with the other person and can feel the slightest emotions. And when you have a conversation, of course, it's incredibly important that you pick up those millions of cues and facial expressions, and they go in a thousandth of second. Facial muscles change a little bit, and an emotional aware person, there have been studies made on that, can read all those things. A person who has developed, who is empathetic and who knows empathy, whereas the alexithymic person, the emotionally blind person, cannot read those things, and those are often awful misunderstandings all the time. In fact, it's they are completely isolated. They are completely in touch. I think I'll read about the emotionally blind person first a little bit, if there's something. Oh, wait a second. Emotion blind. So alexithymia is considered to be a personality trait that varies in severity from person to person. And according to Abdoshin, we are all emotionally blind, and we are all kind of, to some degree, separated from the emotional life, from that life of our spirit, which is the core, which only expresses itself in emotions. First, Brother Greg likes to expand after I've been reading that out. For this emotionally blind person, the alexithymic person, typical deficiencies may include problems identifying and describing their emotions. They often do not know their emotions. This is often marked by an inability to understand the inner state and emotional world of others. In fact, they are quite bewildered if other people express their feelings to them. The alexithymic has an impoverished emotional life and confuses an emotion with sensations and feelings anchored on the bodily level, like sexual arousal or physical comfort and so forth. So he cannot, which we know what is sexual arousal, he thinks that's an emotion or physical comfort, which are only happening on the bodily level. He has few dreams or fantasies and has a very limited or very restricted imagination. His reaction to life's problems is in the way of an analytical, realistic, logical thinking, often to the exclusion of emotional responses. Those who have alexithymia also report very logical and realistic dreams of such mundane activities as visiting a store or eating a meal. Clinical experience suggests it is the structural Okay, I stop here. So let's look at this again, what is written here. That's from Wikipedia, by the way. So they have few dreams, very restricted imagination. So they're definitely not artistic. When they talk to others, or when they are faced with a problem, they always work in the analytical, realistic, logical thinking. Some other author says they are very attuned to the real life, but they are too attuned. They are just attuned to the physical, and that can drive someone else mad who's in a relationship with those people, because they have no emotional responses. And we know the emotional responses are the very important thing in a human relationship, because you must relate on an emotional level to the other person, and the other person must feel understood, and that deep understanding is on an emotional level. And the reactions are, of course, lightning fast, the emotional reactions, whereas the analytical or realistic logical thinking is very slow compared with that lightning fast emotional response. And look at the dreams they have. Very logical and realistic dreams of such mundane things as visiting a store or eating a meal. Now, what kind of dream is that? I mean, this is the most boring dream, if one can call it dream. So somehow they still dream, but it is not like when you wake up, any other person feels the after effect of the emotions still, and the depth of the emotion. And they have nothing like this. It's just like having dreams like eating a meal. And okay, and I could get to Henry Crystal, another psychologist. Individuals suffering who are emotionally blind think in an operative way and may appear to be super adjusted to reality. They tend to recount trivial, chronologically ordered actions, reactions, and events of daily life with monotonous detail. And I think everyone knows such persons who tend to recount in the most detailed way, like they bought a tea kettle or something, and they bend your ear, and at some point you cannot take it anymore, because you have listened in detail about 2 hours how they bought a tea kettle and all these things and tragedies they had to go through it, and what this salesperson said and what the other said, and then came this and that happened. So a very trivial thing. And since that is so far spread, and I know many persons who to talk in that detailed level about mundane things, and once things do they have nothing more important to talk about, that is, you can say they are to a great extent, they are alexithymics and are emotionally blind. So it's a general disease. And also there are reactions, this robot-like behavior, like this is a very typical behavior. And so this is the contrary of the empathic person, the robot-like person acting out of the intellect, trying everything to have an intellectual understanding for things where there cannot be an intellectual understanding. There are whole realms where there cannot be an intellectual understanding. And with their whole inability to pick up the non-verbal signs which express emotional states in another being. That might be the flicker of a hand. And the empathic person has a wonderful rapport to the other person and picks up every emotional swing in the other person. And by those non-verbal signs, and communication scientists, they think that about 80% of communication is non-verbal. And that's, I just say that on. That's perhaps also why person-to-person communication is such a wonderful experience, and why things go so awry often if you communicate by email, because the emotives are just a very crude attempt to replace that emotional channel which accompanies normal human interaction. And the psychologists found out that we actually pick up millions of signs in thousands of seconds, like a gesture, an expression in the eye, a flicking, a movement of the hand which expresses patient, an irritation in the voice, and all such things. So I think that made it clearer now what emotionally blind person is and what an empathic person is and what empathy is. So I pass it back to you.
Yes, thank you for that, Brother Rainer. Dear listeners, you're listening to Bless Radio. It's the Tuesday night spiritual discussion program. The aim of the show is to introduce you to the spiritual knowledge in the light of truth, the Grail message by Abdrushin. And the topic for tonight's discussion is empathy, sympathy and empathy. And you can join us in our discussion with any questions or comments. The number to contact us here in UK, it is 079 444 313 66. You can call, text or use WhatsApp. And if you're outside of UK, it is 0044 79 444 313 66. Brother Gregory, I just want to, Brother Ryan has been talking about, people being emotionally blind, not having empathy or any apathy, if I can put it like that, which is of course a human quality. And then we also want to, being a spiritual program, we know that this is actually a spiritual activity, not but being on the earth, we also have our brain and the intellect in play as well. So I'm going to slightly shift this a little bit to the things that are happening in the world in this way, that this sort of question, when we hear about sort of genocides, let's say in Africa, or I know not something recently that has happened, but in the past and in the decades and so on. And it's like the people who are doing that are like not really human, who are perpetrating these crimes. So I want to ask Brother Gregory, what does it show about the state of human beings that it can go to that level where, we can lose all our humanity really, when people attack and do these genocides,
Well, the question is looking at the state of humanity, or those who sort of perpetrate such events, which tend to oppress many others and inflict terrible pain on others. First, one has to understand that when sympathy or empathy is mentioned, it doesn't really mean that the one who has the sympathy or empathy is going through such a pain physically. For the flood victims, there are two aspects: the physical feeling or sensing, and then the other one on the thought process or in one's thoughts. So having experienced this thing physically, thoughts are generated, all right, at that particular level. These thoughts could be just physical thoughts. They could be intuitive thoughts. When sympathy or empathy is mentioned, it is in relation to to some extent the physical thoughts or the intuitive thoughts, and we now have a sort of response, and which means one then puts oneself and tries to feel or tries to sense retroactively what the other person must have gone through physically without going through the physical pain himself. So these are what happened. When one examines these things very carefully, you will find that for one who has lost that innate ability to sense intuitively, to have sympathy intuitively with another, it's as if that person is blind and deaf to the suffering of others. Therefore, for one to be blind and deaf, it means there is no tune. One is not attuned to the vibrations that are going around, which are so prevalent. When one is not in tune, one is unable to experience it at that level in the thought forms or in intuitive forms, which leads to the spirit. For that to happen, it must be the other party who has lost that ability, yet here on earth is intuitively blind or deaf, or one can call it a situation in which one has sunk so low and one is insensitive to the finer vibrations that make one a human spirit. What one may compare this to is a scenario, which scenario means, imagine that you are far away, you have people from your hometown, and you are in a different country. When you meet somebody from your hometown, from the same hometown, immediately you are able to connect and discuss how beautiful the hometown was, how the things are there, and you feel happy. It's as if there's immediate empathy, there's immediate connections, everyone is happy. That means you are able, even on a thought level or on an intuitive level, able to picture, able to have some sensing and make connections and relate on many levels, because you are from the same hometown, or now you've come to realize you are from the same hometown. The same thing is expected of the human spirit. For the human spirits set out from their initial home as unconscious spirit germs, which spirit germs need to move out in order to develop and return as self-conscious spirit germs. Deep within them, they have a sensing of the beauty, of the wonders of their home or of their hometown. And therefore, when they are at this level in matter, in the world of matter, and are here physically, there is the sensing when they meet their fellow human spirit that we are from the same place, and we are able to exchange views. We are able to support one another. So for a human spirit which has lost that ability to have a sensing that they have come from the same realm, it only means one has sunk so low and has become insensitive to those fine vibrations that have arisen within the soul, which makes the human spirit a real human spirit. So it only shows the depth to which many have sunk when they are unable to have any sympathy, but are only able to relate on a physical level. For the real man is of spirit. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Brother Gregory. I have a follow-on, but maybe I'll ask Brother Reiner to sort of answer that. Um, Brother Rainer, you know what? Following what Brother Gregory is saying, it looks like the spirit is somehow, as he said, it's like sunk, and you know, it's not able to function as a real human being. You know, because if you know, you wouldn't kill another human being or do a genocide, let's say. You know, if you're a true human being, it's just not. You can't think like that, right? But somehow on the earth, somehow the spirit is not able to be active, and it's got sort of trapped into a certain way of thinking, and is able to go ahead and do those crimes. So how can that be that the spirit? And I always think a spirit is more powerful than the the body that we live on, live in. Sorry. So how could it be that the spirit can sort of be overpowered and not be able to act like a spirit? That's to Brother Rainer.
Yeah, I think that's one of the very important question. And why are we dissociated from our emotional life? Why do we not understand our emotions? Why even why do they not come through, like we saw in this emotionally blind people? They do not dream anymore. They have some physical symptoms of an emotion, like increased heart rate or increased blood pressure or something, but they have no idea where it's coming from. So there's a total disconnect between the self, the inner self, which emotes, which expresses itself through emotions, and the day consciousness, where people have no idea. And actually they those people, often those emotionally blind people, I don't want to use now the technical term for those people, but they often have a general feeling that they live in a gray world, without joy, without colors. And I had the technical term for that, but I keep forgetting it, but I'm using just the normal words. And so why is that? And of course there's a biological basis, and the biological basis has been also described in the Bible, and it has been called original sin. Now the very important thing is to understand original sin. That has never been understood by the church or all the people who think about God and think themselves experts on what the will of God is, the theologians. So let us look at original sin. I stated above that the emotionally blind person approaches the world in a robot-like way. He analyzes in an analytical way each situation. If the partner does something, he also analyzes in an analytical way. And it's just this propensity to do things via analytical thinking, to think. Analytical thinking solves every problem. This belief, which has been there for thousands and thousands and thousands, 10,000s, hundreds, thousands of years. And men always try to rely more on this deceptive picture that through thinking, through especially analytical thinking, we can solve the problems. And the people were trained in analytical thinking, and the schools put their emphasis on analytical thinking. And this brought about biological changes, which then changes in the brain, which were then encoded in the genetic code. So as more and more that one-sided usage of our brain became encoded in genetic code, it was passed on via the genetic code to the next generation. And so the next generation itself had already a biologically not quite functioning brain. And the extreme case of the biologically not quite functioning brain, I just described before in the function anymore. So he still feels somehow the body still reacts to emotions, but he's not in touch anymore with his emotions. He's not in touch anymore with his own self. And this has been brought about, is the result of a brain which has been used thousands and thousands of years in a wrong, one-sided way, always enhancing and strengthening the intellect and the belief of the human being that with the intellect we can solve everything. So alexithymia or alexithymia is an illness today, which is the end result of our one-sidedly developed brain, and that part which really can pick up the emotional states, our own emotional states, so that we know ourselves, and also the emotional states of others, that has been so weakened that the spirit is embodied is in the body, but we cannot perceive it. It sends forth its signals, but they don't get through. They don't register in day consciousness. So we actually do not know why our heart races, or why we start sweating or shivering, or the alexithymic person does not know. And so that's a severe illness. And if you read the Grail message, you find a very natural understanding. And the Grail message is corroborated by all those psychological studies. And I think, and now there are persons on the extreme, of course, like you already mentioned, or the previous speaker mentioned, who are completely emotionally dead. And the most vicious kind of those are the psychopaths, like serial killers and wife batterers and things like this. And you always will find, when you read the descriptions of those, that they are emotionally dead. They have no compassion, no empathy. They feel absolutely nothing. And one of the most vicious ones they found out just by incidents. I will read those because it really supports what the Grail message says and shows it in very clear lives. We've got the wife batterers, and I just read it out, this study. One of the more ominous ways we are talking about people with the absence of empathy. Empathy does not exist anymore. And they are often the worst criminals. And that has been proved by lots and lots of studies into child molesters, into wife batterers, or into serial killers. There's this one trait. They can separate itself completely from any empathy. So I read it now, this thing. One of the more ominous ways this absence of empathy may display itself was discovered by accident in a study of the most vicious of wife batterers. I must say, these are the most vicious of wife batterers. They are not the normal wife batterers. The research revealed a physiological anomaly among many of the most violent husbands who regularly beat up their wives or threaten them with knives or guns. The husbands do so in a cold, calculating state, rather than while being carried away by the heat of the fury. So this is, of course, which gives it away. If you read those words, the husbands do so in a cold, calculating state, you know it's one thing, it's the intellect. They are under the influence of the intellect, and the dominance of the intellect has become so strong that the empathy has completely been obliterated in those human beings. The husbands do so in a cold, calculating state, rather than while being carried away by the heat of the fury. As their anger mounts, the anomaly emerges. Their heart rate drops instead of climbing higher, as is ordinarily the case with mounting fury. This means they are growing physiologically calmer, even as they get more belligerent and abusive. Their violence appears to be a calculated act of terrorism, a method for controlling their wives by instilling fear. So we here have again this word which must make one very aware. Whenever you hear calculation, this is the mark of the intellect. Their violence appears to be a calculated act of terrorism, a method for controlling their wives by instilling fear. And it's instilling fear. This is a manipulation, also which no empathetic person ever will do, or no person who is spiritually, who is in touch with his own spirit. These coolly brutal husbands are a breed apart from most other men who batter their wives. For one, they are far more likely to be violent outside the marriage as well, getting into bar fights and battling with co-workers and other family members. And while most men who become violent with wives do so impulsively, out of rage after feeling rejected or jealous, or out of fear of abandonment, these calculating batterers will strike out at their wives seemingly for no reason at all. And once they start, nothing she does, including trying to leave, seems to restrain their violence. And so I leave it with that. And this is this out of the blue, just to intimidate the wife, to keep her in a constant state of terror and fear, and to play with the emotions of the other person. That is the most ugly form of the rule of the intellect. And unfortunately, we live in times where the intellect is celebrated and analytical thinking is celebrated. But the Grail message makes it very clear: the intellect on its own and the rule of the intellect on its own, if it really rules the human being, that he is out of touch with his own inner self, with his empathic powers, that will lead to horrendous crimes. And the horrendous crimes we are experiencing today are the result of human beings which have no compassion, work in a cold, calculating way, and that can come about by political fanaticism, religious fanaticism, and by all other kinds of things. So I will stop here, but we must understand the role of the intellect, and we must understand that this dominance of intellectual thinking has led to biological changes in the brain which have been encoded in the genetic code of the human being, in the genome, and they are passed on from generation to generation. Unfortunately, we must say we are a humanity which has not a properly functioning brain anymore. So I'll pass it back to you, Brother Sard.
Thank you for that, Brother Rainer. Again, Brother Gregory, I would like to follow on from what Brother Rainer has been saying. There's sort of two aspects, really. One is the general thing, the domination of the intellect to the whole human beings, all the human beings, and then there's some extreme people who, for their own personal selfish reasons, whatever, to have control or something, they go to a very manipulative sort of state that they have reached. So first of all, I want to ask you, Brother Gregory, as Brother Ryan has said, there's been over a long time, so from one generation to the next, the domination of the intellect resulting in the, let's say, overdevelopment of the intellect and one-sided development, and meaning that the spirit is not being fully in control of its body. So I want to ask, with regard to that, can the spirit be held responsible for the, let's say the sins of parents are, can we be responsible for those sins, that things that we've inherited a brain from our parents or from grandparents or whatever, whatever further generation there is, which is like a handicapped brain. And so when we do things, more intellectually and harmful things, let's say, are we responsible for that, or is it really from the blame goes to the previous generations? Can you tell us something about that?
The question you asked is, okay, are we responsible for what we have inherited physically?
Well,
that is where things are heading to.
yes.
The key thing here is each person has a will to make a decision. We were able to come through our parents because there must be some attunity or some homogeneity between us and our parents. That's why we're able to incarnate in the neighborhoods of our parents. And our parents can only give us physically what they have. And they cannot give to us what they do not have. And since it is the limited capacity to perceive that they have, and they can transmit through the physical body, these features of physical body, then that is what we inherit from them. However, there is a difference between the spirit and the body, or one may refer to the soul, of which the inner core is spirit and the body. When a spirit takes, or when the soul takes over the body, that is only possible because there is some form of homogeneity. Else, there is no way it can make use of that physical body. Even when it has the physical body, it still has to make decisions. These decisions are based on its inner maturity or upon its experience. The possibility is always there to say, I will do this or I will not. Of course, you can find that many children different from their parents. In fact, many parents will say, I want to study medicine, and the child will go and study music. All right? In that particular scenario, are we going to hold our parents responsible when we have made a decision we want to study music instead of medicine? So one cannot say, oh, the fault is our parents. Our parents only made it possible for us to incarnate, and whatever they could give to us in their capacities, in their strengths, they gave. And through the physical body, which they have now made possible for us to use, which they have prepared for us to use, one should be grateful, because it is an opportunity to mature, not only physically, but also spiritually. For this physical body is only a tool. So we cannot keep blaming the tool. It is the inability, or it is the indolence of the spirit. When the spirit does not vibrate hard enough, or is not active enough, many of the innate features or the innate qualities are not brought into activity. And when these innate features or capabilities are not brought into activity, it means the body is not forced to cultivate these innate abilities. or to put them into practice. And whatever one does not use vigorously, sooner or later, we lose its ability and we tend to vanish. So, in the case where we have the human spirit, in order to make itself known that it is alive, it does that through the human intuition, which intuition passes through the back brain, registers on the frontal brain, which is the seat of the intellect, and then physical activities are carried out. If there's not much activity coming from the spirit, then what you have is that the physical or the frontal brain still carries out activity, but are not deep enough, which activities are localized. They do not bring the inner experiences of the spirit to bear. And that is part of what now brings adaptation. Because once you have the spirit not active enough, you now have the frontal brain, which is the seat of the intellect, adapting to the local vibrations around it, because that's what it's able to pick up, and continuing along that course. Therefore, part of the reason why we have the hereditary sin is because the spirit is not active enough. Were it active enough, it would have ensured that the vibrations of the inner man, which comes through the human intuitive perception, are well registered in the frontal brain of the intellect and are brought into use or brought into practice physically and utilized in everyday activity. So that is the key. For one who intends to play music, or for one who intends to be a soprano, whatever they care to call it, there is the need to practice again and again and again. Only through activity can an organ be strengthened. Only through constant activity arising from out of the human intuitive perception or arising from the expressions of the spirit, only through that constant activity and working in conjunction with the intellect as the executive director, only through that can you have a harmonious development and harmonious experiencing. As long as the spirit remains lukewarm, then we have a scenario where there is one-sidedness, and that has been the root of many a problem. For how can you explain that one is a human spirit who then inflicts such terrible suffering on another human spirit? When that human spirit, or when both of them do realize that they have set out of their home from the paradise of man as unconscious human spirits, how will they come this far? Instead of supporting one another to mature, decide to destroy the tools which have been assigned to them to experience. Such is only possible when the vibrations of the spirits have either been cut off, such that the human intellect takes over completely and is unable to recognize or to sympathize or to empathize with the experiences of another.
Thank you so much, Brother Gregory, for that. I would like to continue more on what you've said, but I've got a message or text from a listener, so I would like to put that to Brother Ryan actually. The listener is saying, can we assume from your analysis of the two concepts, empathy stands higher than sympathy? And then he says, I think both concepts are independent of each other and therefore sit on the same pedestal. Brother Reiner, did you hear me there? Or shall I repeat that?
Yes, yeah, I heard it. I mean,
Yeah.
if the listener could explain his definition of sympathy and his definition of empathy, then of course we could better understand.
He said one thing more.
Why
actually.
he thinks they are equal in value but different in meaning, so they have the same height.
Right.
As he puts it, one on a pedestal here and another one on the pedestal there.
Okay. I've got one more thing just to add to that actually. Sorry to butt in there. He did put another point after that, so I will just read that to you now. He's saying, is being empathetic is not the same as being rational? So maybe we can start with that first. Is being empathetic not the same as being rational?
Oh, definitely not. I mean, if that would be a terrible mistake to make.
Right.
The empathy, to be attuned to another person, really goes beyond the level of rational things, of rational thinking, what you can express with words. To be attuned to another person is, even if you are just together with the other person and there are no words spoken, you are in tune with the other persons. This in tune is a connection on the spiritual level. That spiritual level is completely different thing than the intellectual level or the analytical level. You understand, the understanding on the empathetic level is immediate and is like two hearts beating with the same rhythm, two souls swinging and enjoying the same things. They are in tune in a way, and that is immediate. So we must look at the dimension of time. That immediacy and that fastness of responding to the other is a sign that the spirit is at work. The brain cannot do it. I'm just saying that now as just postulating that now. The forebrain is analytic. It always works analytic and has to think about it. It's rational. And how we understand rationality. And that always needs time. And you start thinking, but you are not being understood. If someone else tells a joke and you are trying to work out and the reaction comes a very long time afterwards, then that person feels misunderstood. If you are in tune, you see the same thing on the street and you even don't look at each other, or you just laugh in the same moment. That reaction is immediate and it's intuitive. That's the big word. It's intuitive, it's immediate. Emotions are immediate, and then we can measure them, and they have measured them. For example, those non-verbal things, the non-verbal cues in communication, there are thousands per second of cues you pick up. Of course, but it's only your emotional capability, your spirit, so to speak, who can understand them so quickly. If you look, for example, take this thing. You walk out of your main door and you stand in a wonderful landscape. There is a blue skies, summer winds wafting, and everything is just wonderful. You know immediately it's a wonderful summer day. You do not have to think about it. Now think about how a computer goes about it, how an analytical brain of it. The computer would test, okay, what's the sky? Blue. okay, this speaks for a lovely sunny summer day. But how is the earth? Oh, it's not wet, so it has not rained. And it goes on through thousands and thousands of questions. And even with the most powerful processors, it will take some time till that computer really has analyzed the picture and can say, oh, it's a sunny day. And he still might be wrong. And it's almost impossible, in fact, to have a completely open-ended visual scene for the computer to analyze. It will take a long time, because if you have a game or do anything like this and he analyzes a situation, the options are very restricted artificially, so that the computer can find very quickly out, oh, this person has been shot, and it never goes to the emotional level anyway, because the computer does not feel emotions. But he has also to test many things, but this is so restricted that he comes very quickly to an assessment of the situation, and the computer can decide in the computer game the next move. But if we are open-ended, like when we live, and it could be possibly anything could happen, then the spirit immediately reacts lightning fast. And we must understand, the Grail message really explains why the spirit can react so quickly, because it is of a much finer substantiality, and this finer substantiality has much greater powers. In fact, the substantiality of the spirit, the spiritual, is completely beyond the gross material which we see around, what we can touch. It's beyond that. And only the human being, which is really in its core made of spirit, can send signals through a very definite and very wonderful interface down to the forebrain. And the forebrain works more like a computer. So we really have to understand, when we say spiritual, it's a completely different type of substantiality, and with incredible powers, and it's instantaneous. It can instantaneously assess millions of things. I gave the example like going out, or it can even like going out and walk in a sunny day, and immediately you have a mood. You feel summer, you have the emotion of summer, and you have all the pictures it conjures up in you. Girls in summer dresses, summer wind, and blue skies, and going swimming, all those thousands of emotions which flood in. This is really spiritual, and the forebrain itself, the intellect, is much more related to a computer, and is much more slower in processing. This thing about fastness, of course, we know it also in the gross material. Everyone can observe it. If you have if you take a pot of honey and pour it out, it will drop very slowly down, and you can see it almost in slow motions. If you have a less dense matter, let us say you pour out a glass of water, it goes much quicker. Still the same drops form, but they go so quickly you can't not see it anymore in detail, because it happens too fast. And if you would have still a finer thing, a finer type of matter, a less dense type of matter, it would go faster again. And if we have something like the spiritual, which is a completely different type of matter, things happen very fast. And the fastness is such a basic physical law. I think it's really important also that the reader understands it. We have in the gross material, light is the fastest thing, and that's why an optical fiber is much superior to an electric signal going through a copper fiber, which is much slower because it's more dense, the copper, and it holds back the electrons. It has builds much more resistance to the electrons and slows them down, whereas in an optical fiber, it moves very fast. And that's why a computer which is built with optical fibers inside, or with very fine chips, finely grained chips, is much faster than an old computer, which has completely different or older chip technology. So the finer is always the more powerful. And so I want to stop with here. And the a spiritual assessment via empathy, and empathy is a spiritual thing, it goes lightning fast, is of a completely different nature than an analytical or logical analysis, which goes always slower. We know that it goes slower. To analyze a situation often can take months, and many scientists, and then they might come, there's an emotional assessment goes very quickly. And it's not that the emotional assessment is necessarily a rule wrong. It is most of the times it's more correct than the result of an analytical assessment of a situation, because emotionally we know much more, because the whole wisdom of the spirit echoes with it, and we can see the ramification. So, and because we can exactly what happened today, the pollution of the environment and the pollution of the rivers and everything where the human being has, whatever the human being touched has been polluted, sullied, and degraded, and it's not in harmony with nature. That's because the intellect, the analytical thinking, never could take into account that whole network of interrelations, which we have with the universe, and not only the universe, with everything. We are, with thousands of threads, we are connected with that. The understanding of those thousands of threads is beyond the capability of the analytical intellect. It is really the spirit and empathy which should rule, and is definitely on a much higher level, and which should tell, okay, and now I apply my brain and I apply analytical thinking to solve that specific problem, but to which problem I apply it, and show also its and also say, these are the limits of your intellect, this is the problem you analyze, but I integrate it into that whole picture. And that's the way it should be. So empathy is definitely on a much higher pedestal, and it's a spiritual capability, and analytical thinking or rational thinking is a very reduced, very slow and laborious thing, and is only not harmful when it is guided by emotional thinking, or by an emotional wisdom, which is the wisdom of the spirit.
Thank you. I've got, the listener has come back with an example, and he's asking a question about this example. So I'm going to, first of all, he would like to thank you, and then he says, I see someone thirsty and offer the person water. Am I rational, empathetic, or sympathetic? What if that person needs that experience by being left alone? So, I mean, it's a, let's say, you could say, there's an example you could see, I'll just read it again. I see someone thirsty and offer the person water. Am I rational, empathetic, or sympathetic? What if the person needs that experience by being left alone?
Well, it's a very tricky question.
Yes.
I mean, if someone asks for something, with your spiritual capabilities, you must assess: are you being conned, or is that a genuine need? And the spirit can know it very quickly. Is that a professional beggar, or does he use a ruse to just get to your money on the purse, or is that a genuine need? And the spirit itself, empathy, does not need a lot to understand, to pick up those vibrations. The intellect never could say it because the beggar just says, I'm thirsty, please give me some water. Let us say it's money, because water, then he really would drink the water and you can say it is genuine if someone asked like this. But if someone asked on the street, oh, can I just ask you a question? I'm hungry. Can you give me some money? And that person might actually go and buy some booze or some cigarettes, or just might con you anyway, and they just need money to go to the next discotheque or to the next nightclub. You cannot decide that in an analytical way from the questions, from the words you understand. Can you give? I need some money because I need some place to sleep tonight. That could be a lie, and with an analysis of that sentence, you could never come to a conclusion, because you do not get the finer vibrations. The finer vibrations you can pick up through empathy. The spirit feels that this person, this is slimy. I don't trust him. I have a feeling uneasy thinking. Something is not quite right, and that is the much higher power of analyzing the thing, of having the spirit react to it, and the spirit has much finer ears, and the empathy is one thing to put yourself into the other's shoes, but if you put yourself into the other's shoes, what the spirit also picks up is all the vibrations around it. Is he really a person in need of the shelter for the next night, or does he just want to get the entrance fee to the club? And you can pick that up through all the millions of things which portray that. The how is he dressed, how does he look, and is he used to such questions? You can pick that up not through logical analysis and not through analytical thinking. To know if someone speaks the truth, you have to be emotionally aware, you have to be alive inside to pick up those very soft and very tender swingings of the other person. So I definitely would say it's quite clear the empathy and the capabilities of the spirit are far beyond and out of reach of analytical thinking.
Thank you for that, Brother Rainer. Dear listeners, you're listening to Blessed Radio. It's the spiritual discussion program. The aim of the show is to introduce you to the spiritual knowledge in the light of truth, the Grail message by Abdrusheen. If you want to know more about the Grail message or get a copy, this website we know you can find out there, which is www.grailmessage.com. I'm going to spell that, www.grail, G-R-A-I-L, message, MESSAGE.com. The topic for discussion tonight is sympathy and empathy, and you can join us with any question or comments. The number to contact us here in UK, it is 079 444 31366. You can call, text or use WhatsApp, and if you're outside of UK, it is 0044 79 444 31366. I've got another message from a listener. I think basically they're giving their understanding, so I'm just going to read it out. They're not asking a question, so I'll read this out. Sympathy is engendered by feelings of emotional memory, either personally lived upon the self or born out of having watched or known of another's suffering, whereby empathy is surely a talent of the spirit, expressed in the ability to actually stand in the shoes of the other and literally know or live with them their anguish of mind, body and soul, as well as their joy. Thus nothing to do with feelings produced by emotions or earthly intellect. Thus as such, empathy stands higher, and And okay, and being of the spirit rather than of the intellect, this enables those who have this talent, such as empathetic of good. I can't say it very well, I'm afraid. Empathetic of good volition, let me say. Uh, the I'm going to just stop there. Let me just stop there because it's getting a bit hard to actually understand it. So I'm going to just say, let me read this out one more time, just the first bit, because that sort of made a bit more sense. So sympathy is engendered by the feelings of emotional memory, either personally upon the self or born out of having watched or known another's suffering, whereby empathy is surely the talent of the spirit expressed in the ability to actually stand in the shoes of the other and literally know of and live with them their anguish of mind, body and soul, as well as their joy. So I just wanted to ask Brother Gregory, is there anything you'd like to sort of comment on that or come back?
Basically, the two words are very, very close, and whether they are distinct and stand on their own, unconnected, I'm not sure. But I sense there's some connection between sympathy and empathy. Whichever stands higher, I'm unable to comment on right now. But what really concerns me is what benefits it is, whether sympathy or empathy, whatever benefit it brings to the vibrations of the human spirit. That's my main concern.
So yes, actually, that's what I was going to ask. Actually, what would be the benefit for somebody to have a sympathetic, how they, when somebody's showing their sympathy to someone, what's happening there? Is there some thoughts being sent to the person? Is that like you're sending help to that person that who's in need of the help, or and is there any result when let's say you have sympathy with someone else? Is there any benefit you get for yourself by having sympathy for that other person? So that's to Brother Gregory.
Well, basically, it is self-evident that one's sympathy wells up in one. That sympathy is only a response to to some vibrations, and a response can only come about when one is able to pick up the waves. One is able to pick up, in quotes, the vibrations that have arisen somewhere else. And in response to it, one is able to send thoughts or some other form of reaction to alleviate that particular condition, albeit in thoughts. But some go further, some responses go further to alleviate that particular conditions where it is possible in the physical, where it's a situations of bereavement. There is very little that can be done, all right, for the other party who is suffering a bereavement, but only a sending of thoughts to the other person just to console that other particular person in that scenario. So, yes, once we have the possibility of exchange of vibrations in one way or the other, that is helpful, and it acts like a balm or like something to help in the reassurance that that person suffering is not alone, but has support, albeit in thoughts and some other ways.
Thank you for that, Brother Gregory. I want to continue with you, Brother Gregory, on a different point, but just to, but to expand on what you're saying, really. So, if there's any situation where we can show sympathy or empathy, let's say, and but at the bottom of it is we have we always have our opinions, and we have our weaknesses and so on, and we are quite attached to that, in any situation. Now, at the end of the day, we know that the most important thing is doing the will of God, and so in a particular situation. Now, how do we know, or how can we find out what is the will of God, rather than to listen to our own opinion and or let's say bow to our weaknesses or something like that? So now, if I pick an example, I know Brother Rainer has already gone into this one, but it doesn't have to be this example, but just something simple. You see a beggar, and this beggar, let's say it is genuine, but let's say it's genuine. So he's and then he's asking for money, let's say. Now, what would be the, let's say, how would you react to that if you were to say, let me find out what is the will of God in this matter? What am I supposed to help this person with? So so Brother Gregory, could you help us to know how do we discover what is the will of God, rather than just follow our own ideas and opinions in any situation? And I'm giving this I'll give this beggar as a simple example, but it could be, you could help us with whatever you'd like to help us with.
Well, the thing is that it's always assumed that one has all the answers, which is not the case. So the opinion that one person has over another is an inner reflection of his states, or of his inner attitude. So when one goes out and sees, in quotes, a beggar, that particular person may not be a beggar. When one goes out and finds somebody which he or she then realizes is in need, that particular person may not be in need. Because if one is relying on external features, then the tendency is there that there could be deception. Most things is that you have a scenario in which externally you observe a happening, an incident, in this case, in quotes, of a beggar. These need to be passed on straight through one's intuition to the spirit. It is the spirit that decides, not the intellect. The intellect is only the executive based on the response that comes from the inner man, from the spirit. It is now the turn of the intellect to put it into activity, into physical activity or thought activity. That is the way it is. So as long as the spirit decides, then man is very unlikely to go wrong. But as long as the decision is left to the intellect, due to its limitation, then it is very true that errors will abound. For if that particular person is in need, that will be expressed not only physically, but will be expressed deep within the vibrations that come out of that particular human spirit, which the human spirit who is doing the observation is able to pick up, and in accordance with the laws of creation or of nature, in accordance with homogeneity, is able to recognize, is able to empathize and respond accordingly. If, on the other hand, the vibrations is unable to pick up those vibrations, or senses that is only a charade, no matter what no matter how the beggar appears, that person should just walk away. So it is the spirit that should decide. As long as man has not enslaved his spirit and allow its intellect to take over, then one is most likely to make the right decision. But as long as one allows the intellect to make the decisions, then the intellect can easily be deceived.
Thank you for that, Brother Gregory. I just want, Brother Rainer, did you want to say something?
No.
Okay. I just want to ask either Brother Gregory or Brother Rainer, did you have anything which you might want to share with the listeners from the Grail message? Anything to read to them? Just want to check that.
I have nothing.
You have not. Okay. And Brother Gregory?
I will only point out that there is a lecture on there are lectures on one, the inner voice, which will guide man, and another lecture on intuitive perception. One will advise that many a listener should either go into the web or procure a copy of the message and examine very deeply the discourse on intuitive perception. For that will bring many clarity to a seeking one. For that will help one to empathize.
Thank you for that, Brother Gregory. I've just got a question from a listener. And this is actually, they've been sending other questions already. So this is going to go to Brother Rainer now. The listener is saying, by weighing and examining someone's circumstance before acting, is that being rational? I think that's what he's saying. So I'll repeat that. So by weighing and examining someone's circumstance before acting, is that being rational?
Well, that's a very important question, and by weighing and examining something, is that being rational?
Yes, someone's circumstance.
Some circumstance, yes. Sometimes we are in situations where we really need to sit back and step back and sit down and have not an immediate reaction, but really have to think about it. This thinking, how does that go about? It can also be in a purely analytical way, and sometimes that is quite appropriate depending on the situation. If it is a purely physical situation, like we were building a bridge, do I need statistically wise, do I need 3 pillars or 4 pillars to make it firm? Then the intellect goes about it, and it's all the experience you have and all the statistical knowledge which has been written in the book. And that's that type of situation. And then, of course, that sitting back and that thinking about that problem in an analytical way and weighing and calculating way, that is the realm of the intellect, and that is really applied well, and we can solve only those questions of that nature. What do I have to do to make that building standing up in the strongest storms? What do I have to do to make a plane faster? What do I have to make a jet engine less noisy? All those things are the intellect. But even there, you might be guided by intuitions and emotions which will tell you, oh, that the answer should go into that and that direction. Even then you are guided. But there might even be cases when you assess a situation that you are working on a purely intellectual level. Now, if you are assessing another situation which requires wisdom, then of course you also sit back and you go deep inside you and you weigh things. And that, of course, this weighing and listening to yourself, what is the pros and cons, or how should I go about it? Um, then of course there's this weighing involves the spirit, and you really ask for help to come to a conclusion in that very important, with those very important questions. Such an important question might be how a politician might ask, really, what is going wrong in schools? How do I better the school systems? What do I have to do? Then there's a lot of laws involved, which are really laws of creation, natural laws, and I have to understand these laws, and I have to look for an answer, and I have to weigh to and fro. And this is just a different, this type of question involves much more. It involves the spirit, and it involves emotional weighing and an emotional assessing of the situations. And then of course intuition is involved, and our emotive powers. In that other situation, the first one I tried to figure out, it was only a technical problem. I also have to sit back and think, perhaps hours, perhaps even days and weeks, work to solve that situation. But it's a purely technical problem. So we really must make a difference between technical problems, purely technical problems, and much more far-reaching problems which regard the proper education for a child, what a mother does, for example, thinking, what is the best for my child in that situation? How do I react? How do I deal with that? Seeing that the child might have go in a wrong direction or is open to bad influences. How do I get it away? That requires a much greater wisdom than the pure male technical excellence. It needs an excellence. It needs emotional intelligence and emotional excellence. And the emotions, again, that has to be repeated again and again. It is the only way the spirit expresses itself. It's through emotions, and this level is completely different from the intellectual level. It happens on a completely different level. Those levels cannot be bridged. They are not. The spiritual level is not just a finer intellectual level, a finer gross material level. It is a completely different thing. And wherever wisdom is required, and such problems like educational problems, then of course this weighing involves the spirit. So sitting back and examining a situation can be pure. The situation might require a purely intellectual activity, but there are situations which involve the weighing with the spirit and the weighing with an emotional intelligence, and these are and this really have been the woman is more equipped to deal with those very long-term and very delicate situations which require this emotional intelligence. So okay, I think that answers the question.
Yes, thanks very much, Brother Rainer. I know we've come to the end of the show, but there's one more text that I've just got. It's a comment, so it doesn't need to be responded to, but I'm going to read it out. It was following another text that I was reading out earlier, so it's sort of so they're saying, not so much stand in their shoes, but see through their eyes. That's how I find a way to help them. Sympathy to me is sharing their emotions. So I think that does make sense. So rather than standing in somebody's shoes, seeing through their eyes, that's the way I find a way to help them. Sympathy to me is sharing their emotions. So thank you for that, listener, with your comment there. We've come to the end of our show tonight, listeners. Thank you for being with us on this topic of sympathy and empathy. As always, we're going to be back next week with a new topic. I haven't pick the topic yet. We haven't got to that yet, but again, we will have one. So I want to ask Brother Gregory first. Anything you'd like to say, Brother Gregory, to the listeners to say goodbye tonight?
Wishing everybody well.
Thank you for that. And Brother Rainer, anything you'd like to say?
A simple goodbye from me, and I hope you could pick up something from that broadcast, and which serves as a kind of which starts you thinking about some things. I hope it gave you some inspiration. I honestly hope so. Otherwise, we would have failed.
Okay. Thank you. I mean, it was not very, let's say, it looked like a difficult topic to go into, and I think we got there eventually in, trying to break it down. So I hope people did understand us in what we were talking about tonight. So dear listeners, thank you for being with us again tonight, and do join us again next Tuesday, as usual, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. We'll have another topic. I wish you all a great week. God bless.